So we're in a series on codependency, and what we've been looking at is that codependency really is an overused term, and it's got so much baggage anymore that one of the reasons I wanted to teach about it was to just clear up some of that baggage, but also to show that I don't think you can understand codependency properly unless you understand complex trauma. Because codependency, to me, is one of the symptoms that comes out of complex trauma. And so last week we looked at that in the extreme case, complex trauma leads to deep shame, which leads to extreme responses to that shame. And the most severe response as far as overcompensating is a narcissist who thinks they're better than everybody. But in order for a narcissist to be in a relationship, we showed that there has to be a co-narcissist, and they tend to be at the other end of the shame as far as how they respond. Same amount of shame, just totally different response, hate themselves, very low self-esteem. They find each other and they create a relationship, and that's what we talked about last week. Tonight I want to go into the patterns that happen in codependent relationships. So I'm going to talk a bit more about the extreme with the narcissist, the co-narcissist. But the point that I want you to understand about codependency was it's two people with shame issues trying to solve their shame problems. And what they do is they try to be there and fix the other person so that that other person will then love them and meet their needs and help fix their shame. So both people are trying to fix the other person in order to try to get their own needs met and to solve their own shame problems and to get the love and respect they've always wanted. So we, in the first talk, said that codependent relationships are what are called the dance of wounded souls. So it's two wounded people dancing, trying to figure out how to get their needs met, how to manipulate the other person. And so in order for that to work, you need a helper and you need somebody who's needy. Or you need a narcissist or a co-narcissist. So I don't know how many of you did the narcissist, co-narcissist test last week. Nobody came rushing to me tonight to tell me the results of their test. But I'm not going to kind of beat that horse dead any longer. Let me go to the helper or the narcissist role. They tend to be attracted to 4 different types of people that all have something in common. So the first is they're attracted to wanting a relationship with somebody who's really impressive. So the president of a company, the millionaire, whatever. So now that they're connected to and they can kind of draw from that person's greatness and it reflects on themselves. The second one is somebody that is just full of praise and admiration and compliments, and they're constantly feeding the narcissist the stuff that they need to make them feel good. And then the trophy. Somebody they can put on their arm that makes them look really good because they're beautiful, because they're just such a wonderful person. They're looking for that person. And then the fourth is somebody who will put up with their crap and not leave them. And they will, once their true colors come out, not get rid of them, but hang in there with them. So narcissists, the helper person, looks for people like that. The co-narcissist or the needy person, they're attracted to somebody who's full of charm and confidence, and they come across as appearing very strong and very full of self-worth and bold, all of those things that make this personality look like, wow, this guy's got it together. And they're attracted to that. And so those two people find themselves. Now, what I want to now go into is the pattern that begins to happen. And this isn't in your notes. I just want to show it to you. So there's really 3 parts to the pattern. And so what many of you are going to see is your relationships. And it might be different face, same pattern. Different face, same pattern. And so basically 3 parts. The idealizing stage, then the devaluing stage, and then the discard stage. And that's what I want to walk you through and help you understand how codependent relationships normally work themselves out. So it begins with stage 1, or the idealizing stage, or the grooming stage. This is the stage that is full of excitement, intensity. It is just sizzling. It is so hot. And so what you got to remember is that word grooming. Now, grooming is a technical word. That means it's used in abuse. And what it means is, how does a person get past the other person's natural defenses and guards to get that person to like them and then trust them? And so another way to look at this is grooming is really kind of the ultimate salesperson. So they're going to sell ice to an Eskimo, and to do that, they got to be really good at convincing this guy they're wonderful and getting this person to believe them and trust them and buy their product. That's the grooming stage. So number 1 is mirroring. And again, it's a technical term, and it goes like this. I don't know if you've ever been on a date and you say, I really like country music. And the other person says, really? I do too. Wow, I love country. And you go, you know what? I'm thinking of becoming vegan. And they go, really? So am I. And before you know it, they like exactly what you like. They're mirroring back. They're listening to what you like and then mirroring back to you as if they like it, so that you say, we have so much in common. I think we could have a great relationship. Meanwhile, they go home and have a steak, and they listen to hardcore rock music, but not when they're with you. They're mirroring you. So the early days in the relationship is they are asking questions to find out what you like, and they're taking notes, so that they can present a package to you that you go, we have so much in common. Okay? Next one, love bombing. So in understanding love languages, you can show love to a person by saying loving things to them, by giving them gifts, by making acts of sacrifice for them, by doing stuff that is a sacrifice, by giving them focused quality time and giving them lots of physical affection. So what happens in love bombing is the person, he says all the nicest things in the world. He gives you gifts. He makes all kinds of sacrifices. You know what? Let me pay for that. Let me come over in the middle of the night and help you, and all of that. And then when you talk, they give you focus, like you're the most interesting person in the world. And they give you lots of physical affection. They just bomb you with love. And so what they are counting on is that you will connect with one of those 5. And when you connect, you're going to go, I feel so loved. And you're going to go, this is wonderful. And your oxytocin's going to start spurting in your brain, and you're going to just feel great. Next one, offering lots of emotional support. So they listen, but they don't just listen. They listen with, I'm there for you. I want to be supportive of you. You feel free to text me, and you feel free to call me if you're struggling. I'll come rushing over. And they listen, and they support you and say all kinds of encouraging things. Then they're very charming. They're funny. They're cute. They're always positive. They're very sweet, considerate, thoughtful, all of those things. That's what they do. And they have got that down to an art. Okay. Now, let me just stop and say this. If you got your notes there, just put a little bracket beside them and say, red flags. If I see a guy that's this charming and is love bombing me this way, red flag. Okay, now it really gets to the red flags next. Okay, so the next 2 become kind of the main red flags. So number 1, they rush intimacy. So they want you to open up about everything. They want you to tell them lots and lots of stuff. They want to know every detail about your day. They are pushing you and pushing you for information. I tell clients all the time in teaching them the natural development of healthy relationships, from an acquaintance to a very close soulmate type friend, you're looking at 6 months to a year. What you have in a codependent relationship is 1 day to 6 days. Then what they're doing is they're pushing you for sex. And then once they get that, then they're pushing you to move in together. So they're pushing for an established type relationship. They don't like stuff to remain in this unknown, where they're not sure if you've bought their line yet. So they are looking to conquer you and get you to say, move in. I think you're Mr. Perfect. They rush that, they pressure that. So that leads to the next one, and that is a hypersexuality. And what I mean by this is they put sex before all other types of intimacy. Because sex, they know, creates feelings of intimacy. And so they know that if they can get you to have sex, that you're going to start to feel close to them. And so then sex becomes basically the glue that brings the relationship together. And then if you have a conflict, they don't try to resolve the conflict, they just want sex. And sex is basically saying, we've resolved the conflict. See, we love each other again. We don't need to talk about that crap because we just had sex. So sex is getting pressured now, not just to bring you together, but to solve the problems in the relationship. And it becomes the glue that holds it together. Sex becomes more and more of a necessity to try to make this relationship work. That is putting way too much pressure on sex. But that is what begins to happen. Now let me present it to you this way. Women will often offer sex in order to get what they feel is love. So they go, I'll give you sex, just love me. And guys will often give what looks like love in order to get sex. And so that can work in a way that you think sex is solving the problems in your relationship and creating a very good, healthy relationship. So big red flags when it comes to the whole sex thing. Let me just add one thing. Well, I've talked to many women, and it goes like this. I say, let's say you start dating with a guy, and a guy is not a narcissist, a guy is not codependent, and he's going to respect you and get to know you properly and slowly and carefully, and he's not going to push you for sex. After 2 weeks without him pushing for sex, after a month without him pushing for sex, what are you going to start to think? And they go, I'm going to think maybe I'm ugly, maybe he doesn't like me, because you've been trained that sex should come right away to fix your shame, to give you an answer that you have value. And so that becomes an issue that you have to work through. So that's phase one. So that's a bit of a fantasy or an idealized state within the relationship. Now, what begins to happen is this guy or this girl are looking to you to solve all their problems, to make them happy, and you're not doing it. So they are becoming increasingly discontent with you, increasingly dissatisfied with the relationship. And so that's part one. Part two is if you're with a narcissist, they can only have a relationship if they're superior to you. And so they have to, what they've done in the idealized stage is treat you as if you're better than them. They got to get that back in balance in their mind. So they got to put you back into the inferior position and reestablish that. So what begins to happen in a relationship after you get through that fantasy stage and there's a discontent that begins to develop, is a devaluing stage where disrespect now begins to enter the relationship. Little shots, little lashing out. And so there's increased bouts of anger that begin to happen, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, and that can build into physical abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse. So the devaluing stage is they are now blaming you for why they're discontent. And they are lashing out at you. Now, they might not do this initially to your face. They might do it to their friends and say, you should see the biatch I got at home and all of this stuff. And they call you all kinds of nasty things behind your back. But that will begin to come into the relationship. And there'll be pot shots and all kinds of different things like that that will begin to take place. So then what you find yourself doing is walking on eggshells. Because you know they're irritable now. You know that little things set them off and they lash out. So you're now on eggshells. But what can also happen is both are becoming increasingly discontent with the other. And for the narcissist, their narcissism isn't getting fed now because you're not responding, so they can cheat. They go looking for somebody else to feed their narcissism. And then that means they have to start lying to you. And then as it progresses, so this is a progression. I want you to get that. This doesn't happen all at once. This is a gradual thing. But they begin to tell you less and less. And they begin to become a parasite. So they just basically look to mooch off of you. You're there as their meal ticket to pay their bills, to feed them, to take care of them, and they start to drain you financially and emotionally. They're a leech. And that begins to happen. Then they're still not happy. You're not happy. There's more conflict, more anger, more fear, walking on eggshells, that they start what we call gaslighting. And I'm going to do a whole night on that. But it basically is they get you to begin to doubt your perception of reality. They begin to get you to doubt yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, how you see things, so that you begin to think maybe you're crazy and you've got it all wrong. And what they're doing is wearing your self-image down so it's lower and lower. So they're bringing you to a zero. So you don't even believe what you see or think or feel. In your world, the only person that you think is seeing it correctly is the narcissist. And so they now have total power over you. You now have zero power, zero self-image, and that is a very dangerous, scary place. But that can happen all the time. What can happen at this stage, before it gets to the more severe stages, is the anger happens. You're walking on eggshells, then you make up and go back to the ideal stage, the honeymoon again. That wears down, and then you have another conflict because nobody's dealing with anything. You have a blow up, and then you go back to the honeymoon stage again. So you start a cycle of unresolved stuff where you have honeymoon, which gets shorter and shorter and shorter, and then blow up, which gets more intense, and then after a while, it just all goes down the drain. So that's the devalue stage. And that can go on for months and months. The third stage is what we call the discard stage or the replace stage. And that basically means they discard you and replace you with somebody else. So they are at this discontent. You're no longer feeding their narcissism. You're no longer being the mirror that they need. So they go and find a new person and they start to groom them. And as they groom them and love bomb them and mirror them, that person just explodes with gratitude and feeds the narcissist all over again. So that is what can begin to happen. And so, a couple things when they're getting rid of you, okay? So first of all, you got to remember that a narcissist is all about their image, okay? So if the relationship's ending, they got to make sure that everybody knows it's not their fault and it's all your fault. So they are now going to the next person that they're grooming, their new partner, and they are doing a total smear of your personality and character. You are the devil in disguise, and they are quite happy to talk about it. Then to your face, they project everything. So you are confronting them and saying, why are you treating me like this? Why are you cheating? What's wrong with me? And they, at first, might not answer you. They give you the silent treatment. But then they might say, okay, you want to know? It's because you're this way, you're this way, you're this way. And they project all of the problems onto you. It's all your fault. And they accuse you of stuff you've never even dreamed of doing. And often it's because they're already doing it themselves, but they're accusing you of what they are doing, but making it sound like you're the one doing it. So that's the projection that they do. And then they start this damage control. So they put stuff on Facebook about how terrible you are, and they put pictures of this new person they're with, and everybody's happy, and it makes them look like the hero again, and they're doing damage control on their image. So that's the 3 parts of the cycle, okay? Now I want to dig into this discard stage a little bit, because many of you have been there, and you know that it is a very, very difficult thing. So I want to come in at 2 angles. So if you are the one that a narcissist discards, okay? So they get rid of you. Usually it's very sudden. It's like flipping the switch. One day we're done. Say that we're done, and they're gone. And usually they move very quickly in with somebody else. It's one relationship to another. They're not ending it with you until they got somebody else set up. Okay? So that is what begins to happen. So yesterday they might have said to you, I love you. Today I hate you. And it's done. So it's a shock for a lot of people. So there's no closure for you. There's no explanation given other than it's all your fault. There's no answering your questions. There's no helping make sense out of that. And so you might beg them to explain silent treatment. No answers given. It is done. And so you're left there. Now, often what happens at this time when they dump you is their beautiful image mask comes off. All of a sudden, they're not able to maintain this wonderful personality, and there's a coldness, a cruelty that comes out, and you see it maybe for the first time. And there's no remorse, there's no concern about your feelings. It's done, I'm gone. Okay, so that's if they discard you. Now the one I want to really focus on is if you discard them. And that is a whole big topic. So if you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, the ideal thing for you to do is to end it and then have no contact. Because you want to know what happens if you allow contact to a narcissist? That means I have another chance. They're listening to me. I can plant a seed in their brain. I can twist their thinking. I have an opportunity. And they will do that. And if they've beaten your self-image down, you'll listen to it. And it will influence you. So, no contact is the ideal. Now, you might be in a place where you can't have no contact because you have kids together. So you have to have some contact. So the term that is used for what your response should be is called be a gray rock. I don't know if you've heard of it. But just stop and think about it. What color are rocks? Gray. So be a gray rock means Don't stand out. Blend in. So if they say, how are you doing? You say, fine. They're waiting for you to ask how they're doing, and you don't even ask them how they're doing because you don't care. Because you're not going to give them an opportunity for a second to say one thing that might influence your thinking. So gray rock means do not stand out by saying stuff or asking questions. Be almost unidentifiable to them. What I'd say after being in this field of counseling for the last 15 years, that is very wise advice. I have dealt with many people who've been in a relationship with a narcissist, and they have not been a gray rock, or they have not gone no contact. And before you know it, the next thing happens. So here's what I want you to get. Giving chase is how a narcissist responds to rejection. If you say no, to them, no doesn't mean no, it means try harder. And so they are going to chase. Now, what they're counting on is a couple of things. Number one, once you've said no, if you've not dealt with your own shame, after a couple of weeks, you're going to start to miss them. And you're going to feel lonely. And you're going to feel all your shame issues coming up. And then what's going to happen? Your mind's going to go back to, not to the discard stage, not to the devalue stage, but to the fantasy idealized stage. And you're going to say, oh, they were so loving. They had such a good heart. There was a beautiful person in there. If somebody would just love them enough, it would come out. And you start missing them. And guess what? They show up with a text saying, how are you doing? And it's back on. So you know what the word hoovering means? Hoovering's a vacuum cleaner. So this is a technical term in narcissistic relationships, and it just means that when you say no to them, they're going to try to suck you back in. And they're going to go back to love bombing you, mirroring, being super nice, charming, bringing flowers, sending the most beautiful texts in the world, all kinds of things. Now, what happens at this stage is what we call dosing. They don't go fully back to the idealized stage. They just give you enough dose of it to make you think that they are serious about changing this time, so that they get another chance. Guess what? Mr. Hoover just sucked you back in. And the vacuum cleaner worked. So the dosing is basically to get past the current crisis. So what they see is you saying, we're over breaking up. They don't see that at the end. It's just, we're having a few problems. We're in a bit of a crisis here. I better change my game for a little bit to get us past the crisis so that they want to be with me again. Now, a lot of people who haven't realized that they're with a narcissist, they keep believing Mr. Hoover and all of his tricks. And they get sucked in again, and then they get devalued again and discarded again. And then another crisis, and he hoovers you again, and you get sucked in again. And it just goes round and round and round until you finally clue in, this is a narcissist. This is not some little boy who just needs somebody to love him. This is a sick person who is refusing to look at his stuff. He changes just to get past the crisis, and then he goes back to the other thing, which is the real him. The masks come off again. And so that is the normal pattern that takes place. So rule number one is, if you've rejected a narcissist because they continue to devalue you, discard you, don't take them back. As soon as they hoover you and you take them back, you've trained them that their hoovering will work the next time. You're training them that your no doesn't mean no. And it's only going to be more difficult the next time. And so what I tell people this all the time: don't say no to a narcissist. Don't say it's over to a narcissist until you have the backbone to stick to it. Because if you say no but don't have the backbone and he can hoover you back in, you are making it worse for yourself. Secondly, test boundaries, or test if they keep boundaries early in the relationship. If he doesn't respect your boundaries or she doesn't respect your boundaries early in the relationship, huge red flag. Because if they don't respect your boundaries then, they're not going to respect them once you're in a committed relationship. So if they break boundaries, don't move the line in the sand. Don't say, if you hit me one more time, I'm done. That's my line in the sand. And then they hit you again and you say, I'll give you one more chance. Don't do that. If they don't respect your boundaries, they never will. Understand that? So here's what I want you to understand. Shame works on your limbic brain. Guess what a codependent relationship is about? The limbic brain. What is a narcissist about? The limbic brain. You have to go to your cortex brain and say, what are the facts about this guy? My limbic brain says I'm still in love. He's saying I'm changed, I'm changing, and he's giving me all these gifts and nice things, and he's making me feel in love. My limbic brain is on fire. But let's shut that down. What are the facts? This guy hasn't respected my boundaries. This guy continues to disrespect me. This little hoovering thing always gets dropped and he goes back to the way it is. Those are the facts. I'm going with facts, not with my feelings. And that is so hard to do, but so very important to do. Let me make a couple observations about ending a relationship with a narcissist. Number one, you will probably be replaced quickly, and it probably won't be done very nicely. So you will feel humiliated. You're going to have your reputation smeared on Facebook and all kinds of things. That is so painful, but that is what happens. Don't be surprised by that. But what can happen in you is it creates a lot of fear. Because you've seen the true colors now. They may have even threatened you as a way to get you back. And so you're full of fear because you've seen the real them. And be prepared for that. But more than just fear, the next one thing I want you to be prepared for even more. You're going to feel a roller coaster of emotions. You're going to miss him. You're going to love him and hate him. You're going to be afraid of him. You're going to want him back. You're going to just be all over the map. Be ready for that. And don't act impulsively on any of those things. You might go into depression, and then the next minute, I'm so glad I got rid of that jerk. All up and down. You're going to have a hard time explaining to yourself what was wrong. Because you don't even know yourself yet. They've given you nothing but lies and distortions about what was wrong. And so your brain's going to spin trying to figure out what was wrong. And you might not figure that out for a long time. And then you're going to be breaking down and crying one minute, full of anger, another super irritable, missing them. And you're going to be, why am I a basket case right now? What's going on here? So you're going to be confused is part of it. And then you're going to feel very misunderstood by friends and family. They don't get a narcissist. They don't get why you're so upset. They don't get why you didn't leave sooner. All of those things are going to hurt. And you're going to feel very much alone. Then that confusion that we talked about, but then you're going to see that they've moved on, but you're having trouble moving on. And that's going to hurt, and that's going to be confusing. And then your shame is going to go to a new level because you're so embarrassed. Why did I get sucked in by this guy? Why do I always pick jerks? What's wrong with me? And that's going to take place. And then you're going to get well-intentioned people do one of two things. Just get over it. Or, you know what? He was a really nice guy. Why don't you give him another chance? Because they never saw anything except the mask. And so you're going to get all of that. And bottom line is you're going to go through a time where you just don't want to be around people. You're not feeling understood. You're embarrassed, and you're going to want to isolate and cut yourself off. That's dangerous. Because what you're doing is feeding loneliness, feeding too much time in your head. And that could set you up to let Mr. Hoover take you and suck you back in. So that is a codependent pattern of relationships. Okay, last week we talked about, so what I've been doing is some of the things that trip people up when they want to find out about this God, because they've heard things about God from Christians and they are quite distorted, but they don't know that. And so it really messes them up. So we've talked about first about God being this angry God, and we looked at that a couple weeks ago. Then last week we looked at one of the common statements you'll hear in a lot of churches, Christians, that God is in control. And that can really affect a person with complex trauma, because they go, if God's in control, why did he let me be sexually abused? Why didn't he stop it? I thought he was a loving God. And so that concept of God being in control is very confusing. So last week I tried to show you that God gave humans a free will. And that's the only way that love is meaningful, is if you do it out of choice, out of free will, and given other possible subjects of that love. So God gave us free will, but then God said, if I'm going to give them free will, I can't intervene. I can't interfere. I have to let them make good decisions as well as bad and live with the consequences of that. So that is painful to begin to understand, is that we do have free will. God has restricted his involvement in the world around us. But then I ended by saying there's a certain mystery to this. And that is that somehow God can still bring good out of bad. And so I said I'd tell you a story tonight about that. And it's a story, there's a book in the Bible about halfway, a little before halfway, called the Book of Esther. It's just a very short book. It's a book about a Jewish girl who was an orphan. We don't know how mom and dad died, but we do know she was an orphan, and she lived with her cousin who was much older than her, so he became like a surrogate father. Why that was important is because they came out of a battle where their country was conquered, so she was taken as a hostage from Israel to modern-day Iran, which was then known as Persia. And so her parents might have been killed in the war, but she comes as a girl, orphaned into a strange country as a hostage where she doesn't know the language or the customs. And so her life in the early days has a lot of pain. Her uncle, or our cousin Mordecai, is able to get a good job. And so he rises as far as a governmental position. And so we're going to kind of look into all of that story. So there's four main characters, Esther and Mordecai. And then the king of Iran was a guy named Xerxes. And his right-hand man was a guy named Haman. And those are going to be key people to understand. And I'll develop that. So the key points, there's two key points. Number one, Haman is an anti-Semite in the lines of Hitler. He wants to see all Jews killed. So his goal as the right-hand man to the most powerful man in the world is to get the Jewish people destroyed. And then the second key point is, as you read the book of Esther, God is not mentioned once. That's significant because the point is this: it looks like God is totally uninvolved. Here's a crazy man who hates Jews, who gets the king to give him permission to destroy all Jews. And you go, where are you, God? Why aren't you stopping this? And God doesn't seem to do a thing. But then as you read the book, you go, man, there's a lot of coincidences in this book. And you go, like I say to people, is it odd or is it God when you get a coincidence? And when you get too many coincidences, you start to go, oh, somehow there's God in here doing something. I don't fully understand it. So here's what you're going to see. God is not going to violate one human decision, but somehow he is going to stop the destruction of the Jews and bring good out of all of this mess. And so that's what I want to show you tonight. It's a fascinating story, and I hope I can do it justice. The next thing that I want you to see is Esther. If you were to look at the early part of her life, it was complex trauma, big time. Everything in her life was full of tragedies. And I think as a young Jewish girl who grew up hearing about the God of Israel, she could have easily become cynical and bitter and jaded and rebellious and say, I want nothing to do with that. He hasn't helped me. He hasn't been here for me. And so this girl, I think, went through a time where she was probably struggled with bitterness or became very bitter towards God, was convinced he wasn't trustworthy, and that maybe he didn't even love them, that he had abandoned them. And so she's got a crisis of faith in the midst of all of her trauma. And the final thing I want you to see as a key point is a phrase that says, for such a time as this. And so what Mordecai is going to say to Esther one day, Esther, do you think that all of the stuff of your life, all of the tragedies, all of the things that happened to you that you hated, do you think that maybe God was somehow orchestrating that, though we don't understand, to prepare you for such a time as this? And I'm going to explain what that time is. So, big picture. Way back in Genesis 3, God said after Adam and Eve rebelled against God, they listened to Satan. God said to Satan, someday I'm going to send my Messiah to crush you. And then in Genesis 12, Satan's listening because God says to a guy named Abraham, that guy that's going to crush Satan is going to come from you. In other words, the guy that's going to crush Satan is going to be a Jew. So guess what Satan wants to destroy is the Jewish people. And he's been working at that for years. The whole world of anti-Semitism. And so what adds to the complication is not just that Satan wants to destroy the Jews, that Haman now as his messenger goes to Xerxes. And what you have to understand is Xerxes was the most powerful man in the world. Persia at that time ruled the world. And Xerxes made a law that if he signed a law, it could never be undone. So if he signed a law in agreement with Haman to wipe out the Jews, it could never be undone. So now, God doesn't just have an issue with Satan, he's got to deal with the most powerful man. And guess what Haman gets him to do? Sign a law to wipe out the Jews. And so if you're a spectator, you go, God, you got a big problem here. I don't know how you're going to pull this off. It is looking totally impossible to ever prevent the total destruction of the Jewish people. So that's the big picture. Now let me show you all of the coincidences, okay? So we're going to start with Xerxes. And what you have to understand about Xerxes, and they found in an inscription in Iran from Xerxes where he said, I am the sun. I am the brightest star in the, like narcissism, to the extreme. This was a crazy egomaniac. So here's what he did. He was looking for all of the praise. So he says, I am going to throw a party for all of my political people from all the provinces. And there's 127 different provinces in Iran. And I'm going to bring them all together. And the party's going to go for half a year. And I am going to bring out the wine glasses, and they're all going to be made out of solid gold. So people are going to be drinking wine out of solid gold. What is he doing? Are you impressed with me yet? Are you impressed with me yet? He is putting on the most extravagant show and display of wealth that we can imagine. And then what they had in Persia or Iran was a law that if you were invited to a banquet by the king, is there would be a bouncer who'd be watching how much wine you drank, and once you reach the limit, you're cut off. But what Xerxes says is there's going to be unlimited alcohol. You can drink as much as you want. Not a good place for addicts. And I'm going to bring the best food from all over the world. And it lists all the different types of food. Exotic food. Amazing food. And then after a half year, he opens it up to all the people of the country. And for a whole week, they get to eat and drink like they've never eaten and drank before. So that is what he's done. So he makes this decision to show off, basically. Okay? Then when everybody's drunk and all the people of the nation are there in that final week, on the final day, everybody is drunk and he's kind of drunk himself. And he says, we need to spice this up. My wife is the most beautiful woman around. I'm going to tell her to come and do a little, and we don't know what the dance was supposed to be. We don't know if it was a pole dance with kind of nudity or if it was just showing off a little bit of her beauty. But he wants to put his wife on display to a whole bunch of drunk men, leering men. And his wife's name is Vashti, and she says no. Now, nobody says no to a narcissist like Xerxes. So he is so mad because she's making him look bad that he says, you are no longer my wife and you are no longer the queen, and she was deposed. So that's the drama, okay? So then after that, so again, there's no God. This crazy man's making all these decisions. That's what I want you to see. After that, he's in a battle. And so they're conquering territory. They got enemies. And he comes back from the battle, and it didn't go well, and he sinks into a depression. He's missing Vashti. He's sad about the failed battle. He's worried about what people are thinking about his leadership. And all of a sudden, in that depressed state, he starts to think, maybe I should get Vashti to come back. And all of his advisors go, oh no, we can't let him go there. So they step in and they say, King, we have a beautiful idea for you. Why don't you pick a new queen? And in order to do that, why don't you bring in or set up a beauty contest and have every province send their most beautiful woman to the beauty contest? And what's going to happen in the beauty contest is the women are going to get 1 year of beauty treatments. Skin treatment, I don't know what they do for 1 year, but they're going to do it for 1 year. And these women who are already beautiful are going to go from a 10 to a 15. And then you're going to get one night with each woman to have sex and see how they perform in bed. And after you've gone through all the women, you can decide which is the most beautiful, wonderful woman and make a new queen. Now that's a sick man. But he says, okay, let's do that. So you can now imagine every province has got to have their own beauty contests. And then once they get the most beautiful woman from each contest, they now bring them to the great beauty contest. And then 1 year sitting in a harem, getting beauty treatments every day, one night to sleep with the king. Now, can you imagine if you were one of the women? You go, if he doesn't pick me, I don't get to go home. I spend the rest of my life sitting in that harem. And he might call me maybe once or twice in the rest of my life for sex when he's bored, but my life is going to become really dull. Esther got picked to be in the beauty contest. So that means that this young girl, Esther, is a hot looker. She is beautiful. Now, I suspect that she probably at times resented that she was so good looking, because she got a lot of undesirable attention from men. And so she gets brought into this big beauty contest, okay? So that's happening. So that's Xerxes, okay? Next person is Haman, and he has this Mordecai guy, and Mordecai is a guy that sat at the city gate. He's a gatekeeper, kind of security guard. And so every day, as the bigwigs went into the palace, they went by Mordecai's gate. So he kind of the most important gate to be a security guard. And so whenever Haman came, everybody else bowed down to him because he was Xerxes' right-hand man, not Mordecai. He was a devout Jew, and he would only bow down to God, never a man. And that just rankled Haman, because he is a narcissist too. You got two narcissists working together here. And so what? It just bugged him and bugged him and bugged him and bugged him. So finally, he is so full of hate towards the Jews based on Mordecai's treatment, he goes to the king and he says this: "How would you feel, king, if you knew there was a group of people who didn't respect you or follow all of your traditions and laws?" The king says, "I wouldn't like that." He says, "Well, there is a group of people like that." Now, they were probably some of the best citizens, but Haman distorted it and presented it like they were rebellious, no good people. And he says, "King, if you'll give me permission, I'll wipe them all out and get rid of them." So the king says, "Okay, you have my permission." They brought out a legal document and the king signed it. But before they signed it, Haman was a very superstitious person. He didn't know what day to pick as the wipeout date. So he decided, he was a gambler, he decided to roll dice, and he rolled dice, which are called Purim, which we get the Feast of Purim if you're Jewish and you understand that. He rolled dice, and it picked a time about a year away. And so it was announced that about a year from now, on this day, everybody in Iran has permission to kill every Jew they know or see. And that was the law signed by King Xerxes. Okay, so that's going on. You got Xerxes here. You got crazy Haman here doing their narcissist stuff. You got Mordecai standing by his beliefs. But Mordecai has something else happen. So another little coincidence. One day as he's standing as security guard, he overhears two men whispering. And he kind of leans in, and he hears that they're planning to kill the king, an assassination plot. And so he goes and he reports it to the right person. They look into it and find out about this assassination plot, and these two guys are arrested and done away with. He prevents the assassination of the king. Nothing is done about it. It's just kind of written down as part of their daily ledger that this happened, and the story moves on. Then Esther, now we come to her part of the story, brought into this beauty contest. Guess what? She wins. And she becomes the new queen of Iran. Now, what you have to understand at this point is that when she's a little girl, Mordecai said, "Don't reveal your nationality. Keep it a secret, because there's a lot of people that don't like us." So nobody knew she was a Jew. So when she gets married to the king and becomes the queen, he doesn't know that she's a Jew, just that she is one hot-looking lady. Okay, now we move on in the story. Haman's edict is pronounced. Mordecai hears about it, and he is devastated because now all the Jews are going to be wiped out. And so he, one day, throws kind of stones up at Esther's window, and she looks out, and he says, "Shh, come here." He says, "Have you heard the new edict?" And she goes, "No, I'm just the queen. Nobody tells me anything." And he says, "Well, on this date, Haman has got Xerxes to sign a law that all the Jews will be killed." And Esther goes, "That's me." And so he says, "You know what? You're the queen. Maybe God brought you through all of this for such a time as this, to save the Jewish people." And she goes, "Not possible." And here's why she said that. The narcissist King Xerxes, nobody ever was allowed to go and see him unless he asked them to come. You could not initiate a meeting with him. So Esther is being asked to initiate a meeting with the king. And what would happen if a person tried to initiate a meeting with the king? If he was annoyed that day, he could basically, right on the spot, say, I didn't want you here, kill this guy. It was death sentence could be given. And Esther says this, we used to have a great sex life, but he hasn't asked me for sex for a month now. I think he's losing interest in me. I can't just show up. I could if we had sex last night and he was all hot, but I can't just show up after a month and say, can I talk to you? She's scared to death. I think if I go to the king, I'm going to be killed. Now, there is one allowance. If you went to the king and he wanted you there, even though he hadn't invited you, he liked you, he would take his scepter and he'd hold it out to you for you to touch. And that gave you permission to keep on going with the meeting and your life would be spared. So Esther is saying, I can't go to the king. He hasn't wanted me for a month and I'll probably die. And Mordecai says, think about it. There's too many coincidences in your life that God maybe has done all of something of this to bring you to this place to save the Jewish people. So Esther says, okay, have all the Jews pray for 3 days and fast. Don't eat, just pray, beg God to help me, and on the third day I'm going to go see him. Now you can imagine she'd just be trembling as she goes to see him. And she goes into the room, and he holds out a scepter. Whew. Relief. And he says to her, Esther, my queen, what do you want? I'll give you up to half of my empire if you would like that. Wow, that's a lot of money. But you know what she says? All I want is for you to come to a banquet that I want to have for you and Haman. And all the narcissist thinks is, oh, she's adoring me. She wants to feed my narcissism and tell me how great I am. And so, yeah, we'll come to a banquet. And so they go to the banquet and they have a beautiful banquet. She does it up right. And then at the end of it, he says again, what do you want, Esther? Up to half my kingdom, I'll get anything you want. She says, come again tomorrow for a second banquet. So now we switch back to Haman. He goes home that night. And he's feeling pretty good because he just got asked to a private banquet with the king and the queen. So he's floating on the clouds until he gets to the gate and Mordecai doesn't bow down to him. And all of a sudden he is mad at the world. And he gets home and he says to his wife, all of these wonderful things happened today and I got honored, etc., etc. But Mordecai, and his wife says to him, you know what? You got this gallows that are sitting there where they hang people on. Let's set it up in the backyard. And tomorrow morning, go to the king and ask for permission to hang Mordecai. And he goes, that's the answer. I'm going to go talk to the king in the morning. Now, you have to imagine this is now a crisis. Okay? So what's God going to do to keep Mordecai alive? Well, just look what happens. Xerxes goes to bed that night, and for some reason he can't sleep. He tosses and he turns, and finally he says, somebody bring me the diary of the history of my reign. Now that can mean, bring me something super boring, because that'll put me to sleep. Or I'm up, I might as well review how great I am. I don't know which one it is, but that's what he does. And guess which diary they pick? The one about Mordecai talking about the assassination attempt. And he goes, did anybody ever acknowledge Mordecai and reward him? And they look and go, no, nothing happened. He says, I need to do something about it. Just at that moment, Haman walks in, wanting Mordecai's death. And Xerxes says to Haman, Haman, I want to honor somebody really special. What do you think would be the appropriate way to honor somebody I really respect and look up to? So guess what Haman's thinking? Oh, he wants to honor me. Let's do this upright. He says he should get the king's robe. They should have a public parade where he rides with the king's horse in the king's chariot, and he has all kinds of people yelling out front saying, this is what happens to the man the king wants to honor. And he's waiting for him to say, okay, go and do that for yourself. And the king says, go and do that for Mordecai. his whole world just collapsed. He puts on a parade for Mordecai. And he goes home that night, and he says to his wife, I think somebody's against me bigger than me. They have a banquet that night, okay? Esther's second banquet, and they have a nice banquet again, and the king says to Esther, what is it that you want, Esther? Tell me, please, up to half my kingdom. She says, will you please save the lives of my people? He goes, what do you mean? He says, that man, Haman, is wanting to kill all my people. And the king is going, what? And he goes outside because he's exploding with rage. And he stands out there to get some air. And Haman goes and he starts begging. And he falls down towards Esther just as the king comes back in. And it looks like he's either attacking Esther or he's trying to make out with Esther. And it takes his anger to a new level. And he says, this man, I got to deal with him. And somebody whispers, you know what that man just put up in his backyard? Gallows. And the king says, hang him on his own gallows. And that was the end of Haman. And then the king said, Esther, what is this about your people? And he says, that edict that Haman got you to sign. He says, well, I can't unsign it because every edict I make is for good, but I'll make a second edict. And it will encourage people not to fight the Jews, and it will give Jews permission to fight back. And the Jewish people were saved. Now you see in all of that story, there were thousands of individual decisions made by maniacs, by narcissists, all kinds of things that were happening. There were things that weren't even concerned about Israel happening. A guy having a party and getting rid of his wife because she wouldn't do what he wanted. All of that kind of stuff. There was evil intentions. And somehow, and I don't have a clue how, all of those individual, out of free will decisions somehow got overturned to bring out a different result. I don't know how God does that. But what God has said is, somehow, and you'll never understand it as long as you're on this earth, I can take something that is very bleak and dark and bring some good out of it. Let me just end by applying that to Esther. Who did God use? He used a young woman with a very painful past. He used a young woman who had been orphaned, abandoned, raised in a foreign country, never felt like she fit in. A woman that got all this attention because of her external beauty. People didn't care about her soul, they just cared about her body. She had all kinds of things going on inside of her that could have made her the most bitter, angry person in the world. And at some point in her life, she said, God, I choose to trust you. And God used her in the most amazing way beyond anything that she probably ever imagined God would do with her life. So God took not this well-polished person, God took a very broken person, a very confused person, a person who has struggles with God, and he worked with them and brought them to a place where they would trust him, and then he used them in a great way. And that's what he still does today.